Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Tuesday, October 31st, 2023. Larry Johnson joins us now. Larry, always a pleasure. Thanks for taking the time to come back to the show so faithfully. What are the international dangers of an unbridled land invasion and demolition of Gaza by the Israeli Defense Forces?
An enraged Muslim population around the world. And that's what we're seeing. You know, I noticed the other day I was watching Al Jazeera, which admittedly it has a bias. And they were showing the Israeli ambassador to the UN speaking about the, as he called them, the unspeakable atrocities of Hamas. Meanwhile, in the upper right-hand corner, there was the B-roll of all these Palestinian children, toddlers, babies being dug out of the rubble, lifeless bodies being carried into the hospital. And we're not talking just one or two, dozens on a daily basis. So those images are in the Arab and Muslim world. And when you listen then to what Erdogan, the president of Turkey, said the other day, you know, declaring this as a likely holy war against Israel committing war crimes. So the Muslim populations in these countries are going to demand action against Israel as a consequence of what they're seeing, because Israel's not carrying out targeted strikes. It literally is carrying out what they view as a genocidal attack.
Here's President Erdogan over the weekend. It's to a huge rally. It's in Turkish. There are subtitles. I'll read the subtitles for the benefit of our friends who have this on audio only. Hey Israel, how did you come here? How did you enter here? You are an occupier. You are an organization. The Turkish people know this. Israel, we will declare you as a war criminal to the world. What is being done in Gaza is not defense, but an open and despicable massacre. This determined and faithful stance exhibited by Gazans will be written in history as a glorious epic of resistance. But what is he going to do other than trying to take public leadership of the international Muslim rage? Is he going to do something with his military?
There is that possibility. Well, at this point, I still think it's a bit unlikely, because Erdogan's known for these bombastic kinds of statements. But here's the problem with that. His bombast is resonating with the masses, and not just in Turkey, but across the lower band of what used to be the Soviet Union, through Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, all the stans, because they speak essentially a version of a Turkish language. They're Tatars. And so this is, like I said, this is like a tidal wave that's sweeping through the Muslim world, and the anger that's being expressed in the streets, you know, not just in Jordan or in Iraq and Baghdad, but you're seeing in places like Indonesia and Malaysia that they're starting to awaken to this. So Israel really faces it's on the clock. If it continues to do this day after day, that anger is going to rise up, and at some point there very well may be military intervention by some of these other countries, including Iran.
Meaning that this will be a bottom-up groundswell. The leaders of these Muslim countries will have little choice but to placate the anger of the masses.
Right. As you know, Doug McGregor's made the point correctly, that this is very reminiscent of sort of how World War I was ignited, because it started off as the assassination of the Archduke in Serbia, and then from there, all of a sudden, different sides started lining up against each other, and before you know it, millions were dead. So, you know, and this has that same potential, because the emotions that are evident on both sides, both in Israel and within the Arab and Muslim world, is not giving way to rational thinking. It's not giving way to people saying we're going to negotiate. I mean, as you saw Erdogan right there, he's calling Israel war criminals, and the war criminals must be stopped.
Does the U.S. government perceive the danger of Netanyahu and the IDF unbridled?
Oh, no, absolutely not. In fact, the United States is worse. When you look at statements like Nikki Haley, she's calling for attacks, direct attacks on Iran. You've got both. You've seen even Vivek Ramaswamy, who for a while was talking about more of a conciliatory approach in the Middle East. Even he's come down on it. So the politics in the United States are such that even though you have a large segment of the Jewish population saying that they fear that anti-Semitism is worse now than ever before, but what you're seeing is on the Republican and Democrat side, overwhelming majorities about not only supporting Israel, but about getting engaged in this conflict. Nobody's saying, hey, put the gun down, step back, take a big deep breath. It's just the opposite. It is, grab your guns. We're the number of ships that we have now sent into the Med, just by way of example, exceeds anything that we did during our invasion into Iraq in 2003. I mean, and on top of what we're not seeing are all the submarines beneath the surface. So it's it sort of looks like a parking lot at Walmart when they're giving a 50% off sale. Everybody's there.
Is the United States committed to a two-state solution, or did that just slip out of Joe Biden's mouth the other day?
Not committed, and frankly, I don't think you'd find support for that in the Congress. It's something that people have given lip service to over the years, but now this is all about dead babies, and each side is presenting dead babies to justify their cause, and it's really sickening, and because it touches such an emotional hot wire in people, that it makes it impossible to sit folks down and say, okay, can we have a rational discussion? I mean, the other day when the UN Secretary General said that, yeah, October 7th was terrible and it was awful, but it took place within there was a context to it. And there absolutely was. But just the simple fact of expressing that led to these, hysterical condemnations of him by Israel, demanding that he must go. And frankly, I think there are many in the United States political elite, both a Republican and Democrat, that would support that.
What are Russia and China doing? They're not going to sit back and watch all this happen and do nothing.
Right. No, they've been preparing for this for quite a while. So I wrote an article last night that noted that starting in 2019, Iran with China and Russia held their first joint naval exercise at the mouth of the Persian Gulf in what's called the Gulf of Oman. Well, that exercise was ostensibly to deal with piracy, but what they were really doing was to ensure freedom of navigation coming out of the Persian Gulf and protecting Iran in the event that someone would attack it. We got to understand that exercise took place, I believe, in like February of 2019. The planning for that started in 2017. When these military exercises are done, it first starts with planning conferences that usually are as much as 18 months out. So since at least 2017, Iran, China, and Russia have been working together, and they've carried out these military exercises every year since, both in naval exercises and on the ground. At the same time, China has taken a leading role in the diplomatic front. They brought together most of the Arab nations in the Middle East to Beijing. And so China is directly trying to insert itself, not directly, it has inserted itself. Remember, China was also the one who brokered the reunion, the rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, who had been adversaries for many years. And suddenly they're all on the same page. So what China and Russia are doing, I think, behind the scenes are counseling restraint up to a point, because they recognize that if there is not some effective action to stop the killing of the Palestinians, that the man in the street opinion has the potential to surge and change the face of the Middle East. It's that dangerous.
All right. So, to whom are they counseling restraint? Are Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin calling up Bibi Netanyahu saying you better dial it back, or because this is a pressure cooker and we can't keep the lid on?
I think the Chinese are trying to communicate with Israel. Whether Israel's listening to the Chinese is another thing. The Russians are talking to Erdogan. The Russians and Chinese are talking to Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. I'm sure they're talking to King Abdullah in Jordan. So they're working behind the scenes with all the major leaders. They're talking to Assad, and they're talking to the leaders in Iraq. So it's not just a one focus. It's multipolar, and so I think they're trying to keep the lid on.
Okay, the incendiary statement we just saw from President Erdogan, and we saw some things from him late last week as well, before the parliament and apparently at the same rally. Would those statements have been cleared in the Kremlin first?
No. I mean, Erdogan's his own. He's his own wild card. He does. You remember a few months back, he sort of stuck a knife in the back of Russia on the eve of NATO summit, where he made a deal with the United States, a deal that's fallen through, by the way, where he thought he was going to get F-16s. But so, Erdogan he's a political animal, and he's been known to say things that are exaggerated. But the problem he faces now is, you saw that crowd was 1 million people, maybe, and
it's huge.
The words are being broadcast across a region that's reaching 40, 50 million people, and they're listening. And so at some point it becomes reality, even though he may have not have fully intended to set the spark. He has lit a match, and that match is starting to ignite the kindling. And that's what's so dangerous right now.
Has the presence of the U.S. Navy in the Eastern Mediterranean actually drawn Russian and Chinese naval power there, as if to say, here's a line, here's a tripwire, don't go any farther?
They're not announcing it, but the only thing they did announce was about a week and a half ago, where Vladimir Putin noted that they were going to start patrols in the Black Sea, and that they would be armed with Kinzhal missiles, which could reach right into the Mediterranean. And the U.S. ships have no defense against those. So he was clearly sending a signal. But you could be sure that both Russia has submarines there, Turkey has submarines there. The Chinese submarines are not that great, but the Chinese do have ships that at least a six ship contingent, say that fast, which includes some cruise missile destroyers. So the Chinese are there. They're sending a clear signal that China and Russia are going to be with Iran in the event that the United States or Israel decides that they're going to attack Iran. And Iran is not without its own resources for responding. That's what these people aren't taking into account. They still think they're these ragheads, disorganized, running around shouting "Death to America" with no capability. No, they have missiles that can reach right into Israel, and they have a space program. So they're not some backward country technologically, and they have an enormous cyber warfare capability that they could unleash on the West. Nobody's even really considered that possibility of having our banking system shut down for a couple of days because of an electronic attack. So Iran's not going to be sitting there passively, but the problem is these images coming out of Palestine, out of Gaza, each passing day with more dead piling up. And the reality for Israel is they do not have the military force. They can't win this militarily. It's ultimately going to have to be a political victory. And what they're doing is they're cutting their legs out from under them on the political front.
A couple of questions. How sophisticated is the Iranian military? How sophisticated is the Turkish military? And both macgregor and Ritter tell us that the IDF should be prepared for many, many deaths of young reservists as they enter Gaza. You can take those in any order you want.
Well, if Turkey decides to get militarily involved with in attacking Israel, Israel can't win. Turkey's army outnumbers them, 4-1, 5-1, and Turkey is a very, they're very effective fighters. They've got a reputation for being incredibly tenacious. And Iran really has two elements in its military, two principal elements: the Revolutionary Guard, and then let's call it the vanilla army. But again, they're not without capability. 40 years ago, they fought a war against Iraq that left millions of them dead, but they acquired combat experience out of that, and that has been passed on to the next generation. So these are nightmare scenarios we're talking about. If they actually get engaged, Israel's only response to that would be to use nuclear weapons.
On the slaughter of or the predicted slaughter of IDF troops as they enter Gaza and its influence on Israeli public opinion, what do you think?
Yeah, it's going to be a week or so before that starts having the effect. Israel is not reporting casualties. Hamas sources are claiming that they're inflicting significant casualties on the Israelis, particularly destroying tanks and armored vehicles. Israel is remaining quiet. Israel's putting out that we're advancing, we're conquering, we're achieving results. They are spinning the story that they went in and conducted a hostage rescue of this one Israeli soldier that was pulled out yesterday. Hamas is saying that, no, we released him. So in the fog of war, you've got to decide who you're going to believe. But this, what Israel is doing, just today, it hit a city block, essentially, and it killed. So far, the death count is at least 50 civilians. Not Hamas fighters. It's one thing if they show the images of people being drug out of the rubble who are carrying firearms or, a grenade launcher of some sort, but that's not the case. They're digging out babies, toddlers,
dead.
And
wow.
And those images, they resonate across the world.
I want to ask you about the hostages, but before I do, smiling because he's such a character. So, Chris, I'm going to ask you to run. Chris is a character, but that's not who I was referring to. Chris, I want you to run SOT 3 and 4 consecutively. So this is my former colleague at Fox and now my colleague at Newsmax, Jimmy Rosen, who's the Newsmax White House correspondent. One of the best questioners I know, really letting Admiral Kirby have it on how many hostages are there, what are the Israeli objectives, and do the Israelis care about American hostages? So play them both, Chris. Watch this, Larry.
More than 3 weeks have passed now since the original Hamas attack and the seizure of hostages. How many Americans have you confirmed in that time are actually hostages?
Less than 10.
That's not a number. I want a number from you.
Less than 10.
Why can't you give a number?
James, I've given you an answer. What's your next question?
You've given an answer. You haven't been responsive. Let the record show. The Israelis have said that their objective, and they've been very explicit about it, is to destroy Hamas. From you and other administration officials, we hear that the objective is to ensure that Hamas can never terrorize Israel again. Those are two different objectives. Are you having a problem with the Israelis in terms of a clear communication here of their objectives, or have their objectives, to your eyes and ears, appeared to change over time?
No, and no.
So does the United States support the goal of destroying Hamas?
We support what Israel is trying to do to protect their citizens from the threat of Hamas. And James, I think you know this, We aren't on the ground fighting in this war. There's no intent to do that. These are Israeli military operations. They get to decide what their aims and strategy are. They get to decide what their tactics are. They get to decide how they're going to go after Hamas. We're doing everything we can to support them, including providing our perspectives, including asking them hard questions about their aims and their strategy and the kind of questions we'd ask ourselves. But the question you asked me is a question better put to the Israeli Defense Forces.
And Larry, I thought there was a 3-star Marine Corps general there trying to dial back the slaughter of innocents. Now Admiral Kirby is saying we support whatever the Israelis want to do. It's their choice, not ours.
Yeah,
It's our equipment and our ammunition that they're using.
Well, and what the other untold story in this is, if you look at all of the C-17 transports that have been flooding into that zone, there's a massive airlift underway, and that airlift is ammunition and weapon systems that Israel doesn't have or needs or has lost. So the United States, it is, and it's not public, but you can read the actual reports of the movement of these aircraft. These aircraft are not flying over U.S. soldiers. They're flying over, some tanks, armored personnel carriers, 155 millimeter rounds, whatever they can scrape up, cruise missiles, JDAMs, anti-tank guided, the whole panoply. Because Israel and body armor, food, because Israel literally cannot sustain its army in the field right now. That's what it's struggling to do.
I want to talk to you about Ukraine, but we're out of time, and we'll save it for the roundtable with Ray McGovern at the end of the week. But Larry, as always, thank you so much for your insight and for your time.
Thank you, Judge.
Of course, more as we get it. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.